You're listening to the Jungle Me podcast. Jungle Me, it's exclusive online courses, events, and a podcast. It's all designed to help a generation of ambitious achieve their life goals. We are told to live our dreams, but never explain how to reach them. We had to figure it out ourselves, and we did. We are lifepreneurs. Jungle Me now teaches you the rules of the game, so you can take smart cuts and not the hard way. Capitalism, real estate, business, healthy living, people skills, and entertainment. We interview exceptional individuals like today, leaders and experts in their fields. They share with us their life experiences, learning, successes, and failures. Our goal is to help you achieve greater heights and help you out of hardships. Take our courses, engage, and see your life change. But for now, enjoy the interview. Hello everybody, in this podcast number 3, I'm bringing you a guy that you will remember for sure. Tom McElroy. He went into the wild by choice after overcoming his fears, and now he's successfully living from his passion for the last 20 years. He has millions of views on YouTube, tens of thousands of followers. He is amazing. He's an instructor of survival and primitive skills. In this interview, he shares with us what it takes to survive in jungles around the world. He explains how what you learn there can be used to be more successful in the corporate, business, and life jungle. He already taught more than 15,000 students around the world, avid hunters, outdoor enthusiasts, youth, and even the elite military groups such as SEAL Team 6. He consulted for Hollywood movies, programs. You may have seen him on Discovery channels. He has a BA degree in anthropology and geography, a master's in international policy related to indigenous people. Now that I have introduced this extraordinary man, let's go to the interview and hear all the stories and insights that he has. The podcast, it's young, ambitious, millennials and Generation Z that want to make it in the world. And we want to bring them amazing people like you to give them some perspectives, on different, perspectives on how to survive in the life jungle. And I found it was kind of interesting to have you, talk about what you do, which is pretty amazing, and, discuss this and maybe correlate it with, the real jungle that and correlate it in some shape or form with, the life jungle. So the first question I have here is, how did it all start up? You came up with the idea. What was that 20 years ago? And then, how did it all formulate, and how did you decide to do this? And how did it, grow into what it is now?
Right. In the beginning, there was very little planning that this was going to be a career. As a teenager, I got really into survival. I actually started off when I was a little kid, and I wanted to be a hobo and hop boxcar trains and just live the adventurous life and eat beans out of a can. And so I got into reading books about and Muir and Kerouac and all these authors that lived the free life, and kind of saw the limitation of what they were doing, where Muir would go out with a couple pieces of toast and some tea leaves and starve himself to death out in the wilderness and drag himself back to society after a month and then fuel up and do it again and again. And Kerouac is eating out of dumpsters and everything else like that. And I wanted to remove myself from that. I wanted to be able to be truly free. And so I saw survival and living off the land and eating wild edibles and hunting as the true doorway to freedom.
And did you manage to achieve that freedom, you would say, today?
Yeah, honestly, I think young Tom would look at what I'm doing right now and be pretty excited about it.
Yep, and so you had told me last time we talked, that it's a pretty bold decision that you did, so how did you go over that fear? How, you could have gone, for the corporate world, the normal life, but how did you go about, making the decision, that's it, that's what I want to do, and how did you go over that fear?
Yeah, I mean, that fear is very pervasive in this. I grew up in a town in Connecticut that's very high pressure. Every kid wanted to be a doctor and a lawyer and was going to Harvard or Yale, and I wanted to be a hobo. And so, that piece of the back of my head has always been there. It's almost still there to this day. Um, and it was just a step-by-step process. And, you the first thing around in that town where everybody was rich and had these huge houses, but they were, very unhappy, very miserable, didn't spend time with their families as much because they were working. And so that really repelled me, and it pushed me into this other world of living off the land and trying to live a different type of lifestyle. And I think once I got into that, it was more that I was running toward that. I was running towards something that I thought was better, rather than necessarily running away from what I was brought up around. And so I think it just got sting just being around people that were free and weren't as restrained by their jobs and careers and fear of really following their passions.
That's amazing. And what's even more amazing is that you've managed now to train, after 20 years, I think 15,000 students, right? Even the Navy
Yeah.
SEALs, avid hunters. So it's today actually also your job and an enterprise, right? And you're traveling the whole world, in wild areas. Can you tell us a bit about what you do specifically, on a day to day or month to month, and how the workshops, you do work, and if anyone is listening and is interested in participating, how does it work? What do you teach?
Sure. So I run a school called Wild Rival, and basically that's mostly me at this point, and I'm going to different locations in the United States and now really the world, where I just travel around and I open up survival classes in different environments and show people how to live off the land there. So it can be everything from a 6-hour weekend warrior class where you just come out and I show you, we walk out into the woods with just knives and we make a shelter that would keep you warm and dry. We carve out bow drillets and crank out fires. We learn how to purify water and trap and learn what edible plants are in the area. To excursions like in the Caribbean where we train people for 3 days and then we go off into the woods for 4.5 days into the jungle, and we live off the land. We spear fish, we trap animals, we make fires by rubbing sticks together, and it's just us and our wits of what we can do. And so it's a huge range of things. I just got back from running classes in Australia, and after that ended up traveling with these Aborigines in Northern Australia for a while. So my life is very diverse, and it definitely gets me out there a lot. And I've been on the road for 3.5 months, so it's nice to take a break right now and be home.
Excellent. And so can you tell us a bit where you've been in the world, and maybe some memories, the best memories you have of some of the wild areas / jungles you visited, maybe some of the most challenging memories? Do you have any?
Yeah. I think, I spent a long time with the Waorani in the Amazon in Ecuador. They're a very remote tribe. They were only, quote unquote, discovered by the outside world in the early 60s. And so they're still out there running down huge pigs with wood spears and spearing them and hunting monkeys with blowguns. And so being able to go out with Waorani hunters and hunt with them is an incredible experience. And they're incredibly physically gifted, and so to go out with them is quite a challenge as well, because their legs are the size of my torso, and they can hike 30 miles out, kill 100-pound, 200-pound pig strapped to their back, and hike back to camp. And it's a pretty arduous thing.
Wow.
So keeping up with people, even 60-year-old indigenous guys like me with 20 years experience can barely keep up following some 60-year-old with a machete hacking his way through the jungle. So I'm always really by the people I'm out there with. But some of the remote areas was, like I was saying, the Amazon, the Andes of Peru, the Mentawai Islands. I was living with a shaman off the coast of Sumatra, Sumba, Indonesia, running with the Tarahumara Indians in Copper Canyon of Mexico, Papua New Guinea, the Indian Himalayas, and like I was saying, I just returned from Northern Australia with the Aborigines.
That's amazing. That sounds really an astonishing, life and experience there. And how do you communicate with these people? Do they, what's the language? Just curious.
Yeah, sometimes like with in the Amazon, I speak kind of broken Spanish, and one of their kids spoke broken Spanish, and so I was able to kind of pass and forth. But a lot of times it's just through gesturing. If I can find a translator, that's pretty key. If I can find anybody that can just tag along with me and hire them to just tag along and translate, because you get so much more out of culture when you can actually ask instead of just staring and observing. And then sometimes I just don't. Sometimes I really can't communicate very well.
Okay, and so can anyone come to those workshops?
Well, some of those trips are just my trips. It's my further
Yes.
training. And so when I go out with the Amazon, with the Warani, I'm studying them. I'm learning how to spear monkeys with blowguns and how to hunt properly and how to weave hammocks and nets and everything else. And I take that information, I bring it back to somewhere in the United States where I'm teaching, and I pass that information on. But then some of the classes, let's say, Caribbean classes, or we're even talking about putting together another class with the Aborigines in Northern Australia, where we go out and survive for a week to 10 days in Arnhem Land in Northern Australia. So those are kind of in the works. But right now it's mostly, that's my way of training. I realized a long time ago that the best survivalist in the world isn't some middle-aged white guy on TV. It's the indigenous people of the planet that are living off the land, and that's what they do. That's their job. These are the true experts. It's not, some macho guy that's claiming to be an expert. So when I want to train, these are the types of people I train with.
Excellent. And do you go also, can those trips be organized in the US? US parks or Colorado?
Yeah, so when I'm not doing that, I run classes in California, Arizona, Connecticut, Colorado, Virginia, Caribbean, Australia, and right now Panama is coming up next month.
So and anyone can go to your site basically and book basically one of those weekends, weeks, or workshop, right?
Yep, that's how it works. It also works where people will call me and organize their own private classes where they say, hey, I have a group of 10 people. Can you come to this area and create a class for us?
Yeah, I can imagine for team building, if you will, for companies, it can be quite a good experience. It definitely sounds very interesting. That's why I'm asking all those questions. As I discovered what you were doing, I found, I'm questioning myself. Can I do this, and do I want to do this? And with this in mind, my question is, what are the expectations for a newbie? I've lived all my life in, nice hotels, corporate meeting rooms, teaching entrepreneurs, startups, and things like this. So I have no clue
Right.
what to expect. What would you tell me, as a newbie on the block there, and what are going to be my main challenges?
I mean, my classes definitely push people's comfort zones, but not in the way that a lot of people think. Like I said, I grew up in modern society and I still live in it. And maybe I live in two worlds right now, but, I understand that. I understand that people aren't necessarily used to being swarmed by mosquitoes and not eating food for days on end. So when I design a class, I make sure that people's, basic creature comforts are going to be covered. They're going to be out of the comfort zone. They might be sleeping in a pile of grass under a grass hut on the beach, but they're still eating fish and lobster and trapping animals and everything else. And so when we go out, I don't just throw them out into the wilderness so that they have to fend for themselves. I'm out there with them, training them and helping them through it. Because after 20 years, I've gotten to a place where when I go into those areas, I can live comfortably. And so we do pretty well. Everybody ends up fairly well fed, and their comfort zones have been pushed, but not to the point where they're just wanting to scream and leave. I want it to be an enjoyable experience, so people leave, not thinking of survival as sitting naked on a glacier with a rusty pocket knife. I want people to think of survival as entering the Garden of Eden, where as long as you know your environment, you can thrive and you can survive out there and live lavishly.
Great. And so what are the survival skills that you teach, and how do you prioritize once you're in the wild, how do you prioritize, the key survival skills that you need to put in place to survive? And then how does this apply also to the real life, the corporate world, or just life in general?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first thing you want to do, and I'm sure this would apply to different corporate situations, is you want to simplify your needs, separate your needs and your wants. And so the thing that always surprises people on the very first hour of the first day of my classes is, we talk about, what do you need on this planet to survive? And, besides oxygen and love and all those things, we have four basic needs in life. And to live on this planet, you need shelter, you need to have water, you need a source of heat like fire, and you need to have food. And so, I impress upon people, if you can get those four things, whether it's in the woods or in the urban environment, you're going to live. That's everything you need to take care of your body so that you continue to live. And so that one thing, just remembering those four things is what keeps people from panicking. Because panic in a situation like that is your biggest enemy. People get out there and they think of a million things that they normally have, and how am I going to do it and do it? And then they end up just trying to run for the hills and hopefully make it back to society. And in that situation, that's when they get in trouble. If you can sit down, think of the four things you need and how you go about getting them, it simplifies it. It makes it much, much easier, and it's not as difficult as people make it out to be.
So you focus basically on those four needs, right? Shelter, water, heat, and food,
Right.
and you're gonna be all right, right?
And that's it. That's really all you need on the entire planet, which, when you look around at the things that we want on the planet, it's a million list long, but what you really need is four things on that list.
Yep. And when I relate this, to the real life, right? So the shelter is, a house or a condo house. Water, food is, water and food, right? The heat, is probably, having heating in your apartment too. It could be also having a passion in life, maybe. But, one thing that strikes me in one of your videos that you said, which I found very interesting, is you say, the first thing you need to do is build your shelter, but not too big. Because if you do it too big, you don't have time to finish it during the same day. And then, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be in trouble. The dark is going to, the night is going to fall, and then you're going to be ending up without a shelter. And I find that this is
Right.
interesting. The millennials, are all dreaming of having a big house, a big mansion, and they delay the whole buying of a shelter, small shelter. So they
Mm-hmm.
end up leasing. I have a friend of mine, I'm not going to say his name on the podcast here, but, he's leasing and leasing, and I tell him, why don't you buy something with your girlfriend, something small? And, oh, we want to be free. We want to travel. We want to move. But what this is creating is that we have a whole generation basically that's pushing away their freedom, right? Because as long as you don't have your own shelter, even if it's not big, you have to go to work, right? You have to go to work, you have to pay the landlord, and so on and so on. So I found it was interesting. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but the survival skills, in the real life jungle, could be also to focus on a shelter that's not too big, right? So you can pay it
Mm-hmm.
quick, you can own it quick and achieve freedom and in the live jungle. And then water, heat, and food is maybe having, just enough, of a revenue stream to get the basic things. And in the society
Mm-hmm.
we live in, I found, a lot of people, it's interesting what you said, the needs and the wants. They want a lot of things, you buy, Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it is, and spend a lot of money on things that they don't really need, and they end up in credit, in trouble, and it's a bit like eating the wrong things in the jungle, right? People are going to end up in trouble. So I don't know. I'm correlating those things together. I don't know if
It's
it
a,
makes
it's very
sense.
it's yeah, it's very related. Absolutely. I mean, that's when I put that list together, or I didn't put it together, but when I tell people about this list of shelter, water, fire, food, that's also an order. And if you misprioritize, where you're out in the woods and you're lost, and the first thing you want is food, and you start going for the wrong priority, you end up spending so much energy on one thing, and then all of a sudden, a huge storm hits and you freeze to death. And so, um, in the outside world, in the urban world, this world, you're counting everything through economics of money and currency. In survival situation, it's the same thing, except you're just counting calories. How much energy am I putting into this thing, and how much energy is it going to return for me? And the true game, it's a numbers game, and you're always making sure that anything you do needs to be returning you more calories than you're putting into it. And that could be saving it, like a shelter. I've been in situations where it was freezing out and I had to put a ton of calories into the shelter, and it took days to make a proper shelter. And the person I was with kept saying, like, no, we got to move on, and like, let's put some calories into our system. And I said, no, right now at night, it's freezing at night. We're losing 2,000 calories shivering at night. If we don't have a proper shelter to stop that loss, basically the best way to hang on to those calories is to stop the loss rather than putting in a couple hundred by like gathering crickets all day or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's a numbers game. It's always playing in my head when I'm out there, is how do I get more and spend less?
It's excellent because it's exactly the same actually in the business world, right? There's always 100 things to do, and the business managers, C-level, always try to prioritize, what do we need to do now versus not do, to be able to end up having a return, as you say. So it's really funny how it completely correlates, So, and
Yeah, it's all survival, I guess.
yep. So one question I have, so are we all born creative problem solvers when and does this show when we're in survival mode? Because one thing I notice is many people, and it's just something that people say, the youth today is born in a bubble, with the impression of, false sensation of security in the society. And they're not as creative, they wait for things to fall from the sky and all this stuff, and they're not as creative as they can be. But my question is, are they born creative? Is that creativity in them? Is everyone a problem solver? And does this reveal itself when you're in survival mode only or
Right.
mostly? What have you observed?
I think what I've seen is, who knows if it's nurture or nature, but like, there definitely are people that are really good at finding solutions in life. But as far as related to survival, I think when you're stripped down and you just have almost nothing and you're out in the woods, you have to be creative. You have to think like, how do I take what I know or the tools or skills that I have and put them together in some sort of creative way that helps me survive? And when your life is on the line, I definitely find that people that otherwise might not have their brain lit up and be turned on to something like that, all of a sudden, when your life's on the line, you turn on and your brain engages. And I think, part of it's probably evolution and, instinctual in us, that when you're in that situation of survival, it throws away all the garbage and it just focuses on what it needs to do. And people's creative abilities really light up in that situation.
Yeah, that's also very interesting because when I relate this with the entrepreneurial world, I think Steve Jobs, got laid off from Apple, and that's the time who then he became sort of a genius after that, for many, and came back to Apple, and that time frame where he was, rejected and sort of in quote unquote trouble, that's where the genius revealed itself, and he came back very creative, invented all those new technology that a lot of people like, but and then there's other example, the McDonald's story, there's the founder also had no jobs, and then ended up finding that little franchisee of McDonald's who didn't want to expand. They just were doing burgers, and then he was in survival mode trying to pay the rent, the bills, and he came up with that idea, and apparently it became that big group today. So it's funny how relating when people have no choice kind of and then survival mode, maybe that's when they become the most creative.
Absolutely. That's something I think about a lot, because I think on a creative level and then just an interpersonal level, when you hit rock bottom, I mean, we all see it with people that have really bad habits, is if you continue to support them, keep them up, those bad habits just continue, and maybe they continue to use you until eventually they hit rock bottom. There's nobody else to bail them out. And at that point, all those bad habits have to drop, and they'll just start over and rebuild good habits. And so when I get people out in survival and, you're at, quote unquote, rock bottom because you just have nothing. I think it's a time for your brain to rewire itself. And I think that's something we're almost programmed to, is when you hit rock bottom, your brain becomes much more ready to rewire itself and start over and start with good habits. And so um, from there, I think people, start saying, like, let's say if you've always expected people to do things for you and you're in a survival situation and there's nobody else, like if you're cold, you have to get off your butt and make a fire, and there's nobody else to do that for. And you start to realize that very quickly, as you can't use your charm and cunning to talk everybody else into doing the work for you. And you develop these habits that are much more positive toward, getting things done.
That's super interesting. So then another thing I've seen in one of your videos, at some point you say when you go put some traps in the wild, you say you always put 10 out there. And because when you put 10, 9 of them, sort of fail and you catch one animal. So one thing that I found interesting with this in the startup world, we say 9 out of 10 startups, they fail. So investors, they invest always in 10 startups, knowing that 9 of them will fail and they will have one good startup. So I found this very interesting that you have the same concept,
That's funny.
in the jungle,
Yeah, I mean, any good poker player knows that they're playing the odds, and by playing the odds, it's a long-term game, and you're going to lose 9 out of 10 hands, but you better win big on that 10th hand. And if you can do that, lose small, win big, you're going to do really well. And so if I don't put much energy into traps, the great thing about trapping, it's very passive. You make them, they're done. You don't have to sit and hunt all day for 10 days straight, waiting for an animal to come by. You set out 10, it's a very low energy investment. And then if you get 1 out of 10 to work, you get a big return. And so it's definitely worth the energy investment that you put into it.
So you would say in the real life, people should also sort of always have, 10 opportunities cooking, and hope to have one, right? A lot of people in real life, when we think about it, they bet everything on one thing, the employer, right, or, whatever it is. But typically people tend to focus on one thing, right? And then it doesn't always work out. So maybe the rule is, like in the jungle, and like investors for startups, just in life in general for people, is don't put maybe your eggs in the same basket. Try to always, keep a 360 view on things and opportunities, and then you have more chances of catching things.
Yeah, I think that's something that, millennials and people in this generation, they know that, and it's not like it was in the past where you got a job at 20 years old and that was the same job you have when you're 60. They've shown that people have 3 or 4 careers throughout their lifetime nowadays, and millennials have caught on to that. So having a diverse skill set is almost necessary nowadays. And so, even for me, like I'm running a survival school and trying to all my eggs in one basket, but at the same time, I've got this backup where I'm also a photographer and, video editor and things like that. So, I think it's always good to diversify, have multiple talents. In case one doesn't work, you can back yourself up with the others.
Yep, that's a good point. And then the next question I have is on luck and adversity. So, sometimes you can be lucky and sometimes, you run out of luck. So when you're in the wild, let's say you don't have, you have those 10 traps and no food comes in, so then you're really faced with adversity. So what kicks in? How do you do when you get unlucky? What are the key skills that you really need to put in place to face the adversity and go to success from there?
Yeah, I think in survival, there definitely is a factor of luck. You could be on the very first day, go out to make your shelter, and you're in an absolute freezing downpour storm, and that's the worst case scenario for if you're trying to build a shelter to stay dry, but it's just you're already soaking wet while you're building it. And then there's sometimes you go out and it's sunny and there's mangoes all over the trees and you're eating coconuts and it's the easiest thing in the world. And I think everybody eventually gets hit with good luck and bad luck. That comes and goes. It's just like odds. I think the people that make it through in the long term are the ones that actually have skill to back it up. Because if it starts raining on that first day and you're hit with that, quote unquote, bad luck, where the environment turns on you, if you've got the proper skills, sure, it might be a miserable night. You're sitting under that shelter, but you've got the proper skills to just make some sort of bark hut and stay under it until the situation improves. And then you come out and shine. Whereas if you don't have the skill, even if you start off, with sunshine and mangoes, eventually, when that storm does hit, if you don't live through that, then you're sunk. And so I think you can't count on being lucky for very long. Like eventually the environment is always going to change.
And so that's from I see you very action orientated. So you told me, what you would do, physically, but then from a mindset standpoint, can panic kick in? And then, like I can imagine if, I'm building the shelter and a storm comes on me and I'm soaking wet and I know it's going to be trouble then to get, food. And you might have some stress and some panic that kicks in. How do you go to not panic, not stress, and keep calm and stay focused on the priorities you were talking about? How do you
Right.
manage this from a mindset perspective?
I think it's survival. When I get to that situation where it's just everything's horrible and I'm thinking about, God, night's falling in 3 hours, it's going to be, freezing temperatures and I've got half a shelter made and I'm not going to get there. Like, you can't look to the future too much in that situation. You just have to realize that there's no other options, and I've sat there with a half shelter made and it's getting dark and, freezing rain comes down and it's just like, I have no other option but to just keep going with what I'm doing right now, because this is my best, I've already decided that this is my best course of action, and, do your best with it and understand that you just might have to suffer a little bit for that first night.
Yep. So being resilient and taking in the suffering and moving on, kind of.
Right. And I think realizing that, like, I mean, one of the huge things that survival instantly teaches you is that panicking or pouting and sitting down and crying, it's not going to get you anywhere. So you just have to bear down and keep pushing forward as much as possible and try to get through the hard times.
Yep. So talking about hard times, what are the top dangers, that you can find in the wild?
Yeah, I would say, one of the things in the wild, I definitely realized, you always think of like lions and tigers and bears, and that's what everybody's afraid of out there. That's much more rare than like things like infection. People used to always ask me, what would you take out with you if you were to, be thrown into the jungle somewhere? And I used to always say a knife. And up until recently, I was in Papua New Guinea and I was with a couple people, and every time you get the slightest little cut on your foot, just the tiniest little paper cut, it would become ridiculously infected. And, I was using wipes and trying to clean it with water and nothing would do it. And eventually I needed antibiotics. And so I realized, if without some of these modern things like antibiotics, like even the simplest little cut might kill you. And so I think infection is one of the biggest problems we have to worry about. There's things like bacteria in your system, like drinking bad water, falling off of cliffs, freezing, overheating, starving, everything else that you can prepare for. And so I always tell people panic is your biggest thing that's going to kill you, because all of those things you can think about, like, hey, we were just in Northern Australia. Hey, there's crocodiles everywhere. How do I not get eaten by a crocodile at night? Like, oh, if I just think about it, stay calm, build a platform in the trees so that it keeps me above that danger, I'm fine. I don't have to worry about it. And so just making checklists for yourself and very calmly saying, okay, how do we get to a solution as quick as possible?
That's very interesting. And then, so you also train the Navy SEALs. So Navy SEALs, obviously, a superstar team, and known by many people and admired by many people. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about that adventure you had with the Navy SEALs, and what you guys did? What did you guys do?
Sure. We do normally with basics classes, even with the public. And yeah, so we would do, they were very interested in escape and evasion. They were very interested in everything, which was really refreshing. Actually, one of the greatest lessons I learned through working with military groups is, when the lower level military people would come through, maybe the newer people, they would come in with a ton of ego, where you would say, hey, this is this type of trap, or hey, this is this way of movement through the woods that was very effective. And you'd always get a response of like, oh, I know that. I've already learned that. You can't teach me anything. And then the cool thing about when I started working with Navy SEALs is that no matter what we had to teach, they would be so into it. They would completely immerse themselves in it. And I remember there was this one Master Chief in the Navy SEALs. He had been in for, at least 20 years at that point. Built like a Greek god and probably one of the most dangerous men on the planet. And we were sitting around, and one of my co-instructors had just taught how to sew up these stitches, and he's sitting there with a needle and thread, and he's sewing up a whip stitch on a tiny little leather pouch that, like, the hippies in the class would love. But watching this 250-pound muscular Navy SEAL sew up this tiny little leather pouch was funny to me. And I walked over and I said, Mike, it's really interesting seeing you do this. That he was actually asking me a question of, how am I doing this stitch properly? I said, it's really interesting to see you doing this, like just humbling yourself and weaving this little bag, which is really silly for him, I think. And he said, the only way that you get to be to the level that we're at is you have to pour yourself into everything. And if somebody else has something to teach you, you have to just completely humble yourself and open yourself to learning everything that you can possibly learn, because you never know when you're going to need that skill. And for me, that almost scared me more. Their humility and what they were doing scared me more, because it made me realize that they don't need to brag about things. They know inherently, they know, badass they are. They don't need to show it off. And so I like that idea, and I try to always keep that in mind, is you're going to learn more if you humble yourself and try to learn from everybody around you.
That's really cool, and it's funny because, again, it relates a lot with what I do with entrepreneurs. So same thing, entrepreneurs, when they come in, it's I have the best idea, I'm going to be a billionaire, it's going to work, and they're not at all humble. And that's the first thing we kind of have to work with entrepreneurs, is to say, well, wait a minute, according to the statistics, there's a high chance that your idea is going to fail within 30 days.
Right.
And so on and so on. And great entrepreneurs, great leaders in companies, also are able to work on this ego. So it's interesting to hear the Navy SEALs, and I'm not surprised at all that they have that going for them. That they're
And
that
it seemed
humble.
that way. The more talented the person, the less they need to show it off, and the more humble they are. So.
Yep. Ego is really a bad thing in general. So people need to temper it down a little bit to be better and to progress in life and to progress in the life jungle in general. It's the trap of the ego.
Right. And that's why I hate the term when people try to say, oh, Tom's a survival expert. And, the term expert to me really means that there's an endpoint to something. And it means that you get to a place where you've stopped learning and you've reached the pinnacle of where you're at. And, I think about survival, and I think, I've put in 20 years passionately into this, but I'm nowhere close to being an expert. Like, there's much more I don't know than I do know. And therefore it keeps me hungry to keep learning more and more and more. And I would never want to get to the end, because then life would get boring.
So how do you call yourself then? It's a survival.
I don't know. I say survival instructor. I'd say, hey, I have a lot of experience in what I'm doing, and I have a lot of great tricks that I can show you. But maybe you know something I don't, and that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm amazed by what you are doing, and the videos that we can see on YouTube is just fantastic. And I'm honestly, on the verge on saying, hey, you know what? I'm joining you.
All right, come along.
So
everything I do on YouTube is one, it's great promotion for classes, and it's also just I really want to confront, sadly, Hollywood's gotten a hold of survival and put their name on it, and it's turned into this either dramatic soap opera or this very phony adventure guy in the woods drinking water out of camel poo or something like that. And so putting out those videos is my way of saying, like, hey, this is actually a very sustainable, beautiful way to live. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be a bunch of infighting and suffering. It can be something that's actually something where you go out in the woods and you thrive. As long as you know environment really well, you're going to do really well in a survival situation.
Yep, and that's one thing also I liked with your style and your format. It's serious, it's focused. It's it's really nicely filmed. The videos are great, and I think it's personally the first thing I thought is that could be so great for team building. I thought about the different teams I worked with, and I was like, that would be a real team bonding experience. You can't get more than this. I don't think so, you know.
It
So
really is, because when you get a team and everybody's lives online together, it's no longer a game. It's real. And you very quickly, the drama goes away and you start saying, like, who's got what talents and how do we get to the goal? And so I think by bringing everybody down to the base level, they're able to like build up together in a way that maybe they can't when, egos involved that really don't work in survival or are involved.
yep, absolutely. And then in terms of preparation, so let's say, someone comes to you and say, let's meet up in Colorado or in the Caribbeans or wherever in the world. Is there any preparation from the learner side, from the instructor side? How do you prepare in advance to this, or you just go and improvise 100%? How does it work?
No, I don't really believe in teaching classes where I just show up and improvise. Like any improvisation that I do is based on the fact that I've spent 20 years learning. I'm going to Panama next month and we're going to do bamboo fire saws instead of the typical bow drill. But I've worked on that for a really long time. Maybe not in Panama, but in different areas of the world. So a lot of that's going to come together. But I also, I'm pouring my way into, edible and medicinal plant books of Panama, and going through every step that I would take, combining the skills that I already have and figuring out if I've got any weaknesses that I need to develop in that area. A lot of when I teach classes, it's very well planned out. Sometimes in survival situations, it is fun to go in and be like, how do I, go into a situation completely unaware of my environment and survive, use the tools I have in a creative way to survive out here in a foreign environment.
But surely there must be, so, with regards to animals, would you look, what types of animals there is, are there any dangerous ones, scorpions, snakes, and
Yeah, I think
mountain lions or tigers,
one of the things I recommend to people on the first step with dealing with flora and fauna is like, you're not going to learn that, 1,000 different edible plants and animals in your area within a year or two. But you can definitely sit down with a book on the poisonous plants and venomous animals. And maybe there's 3 plants in your area that are going to kill you if you eat them. Maybe there's, same thing, 3 or 4 animals in your area that you really need to look out for. And so within a day, you can learn those things. And granted, chewing on an oak branch isn't going to give you any nutrition, but it's not going to kill you. So as long as you know not to eat, then if I put the other things in my mouth, I know they're not going to kill me. And so knowing the dangers first is a really fast and easy way to make sure that you don't kill yourself out there.
Excellent. So talking about food, what are the types of food, you find out there?
It just always depends, and that's the thing is, to be a good survivalist, you have to know your the landscape, the environment that you're in. You have to know it intimately. When you look at indigenous people throughout the world, they know that particular landscape like the back of their hand. If you took an Eskimo and brought him down to the rainforest, he's not going to be any better of a survivalist, or maybe slightly, but not much of a better survivalist than somebody living in Manhattan. And so, it always varies, the different styles of survival. And so anytime you go into a new environment, you're just crashing, reading books, everything you can, talking to the people down there and learning about it. So if I'm in California where I live, like acorns and grass seed are a huge staple for the diet. There's tons of mushrooms up here. If where I just was in Northern Australia and Aborigine land, you have, palm hearts, and you have little peanut seeds, and you've got, tons of fish and sharks and crocodiles and different things that we were hunting out there. They were hunting out there. And so it just always depends. And it really takes a lot of knowledge ahead of time to thrive in a survival situation. You can get by pulling out your basic tricks in an environment that you're totally unfamiliar with, but you're never going to thrive unless you know that environment intimately.
So When you say this, so I did a program at some point called P90X. I don't know if you know this.
I have heard of it. Yes.
Yes, so on P90X, I think it's in this program where they talk about, the hunters and gatherers diet. I think it's there where I heard it, and they say a good diet is, nuts, greens, plants, fruit, low protein, fat, so some
Uh,
say, that's a good diet just in general to stay healthy. Is that the
mhm.
diet also we find in the jungle? It seems it is, right?
It depends. In different areas, I was surprised that, like the Warani, they eat a lot of meats. They plant yucca, which is a manioc. It's just a tuber. They eat a lot of fish and everything else, but there's still a lot of malnutrition out there, and there's people that lose their teeth due to malnutrition. And so I do believe the hunter-gatherer diet's great as long as you're getting a lot of variety and staying away from the bad things. Our bodies are hardwired to crave sugar and crave fat because our ancestors couldn't get a hold of it enough for it to be a problem. They're huge high-calorie foods. Of course, we're going to crave them, but back in the day, you weren't running into a nest of honey every time you walked down the trail. Um, and so we're overdoing it nowadays. And so I'm staying away from those things, making sure your diet is got a lot of different, vitamins and minerals and everything else that you need. A lot of variety is something that, the variety you do see in a lot of different traditional cultures, but a lot of them you don't. A lot of them are just getting by on one staple food that they eat and eat and eat, like the manioc. Um, and so I can't say for sure. Like, I think there's a romantic idea that tribal people are all eating these brilliant, perfect diets, but, you know, they're also only until they're 40 or 50 years old. And so, I think we have much more options out there for variety than a lot of cultures.
And you said another thing interesting earlier about, you need to count your calories, the intake of calories, and how
Uh-huh.
much calories you're gonna spend. That's also something in, the program there, and in general, is taught in those fitness program. But most people don't know this, and I know a lot of people, for instance, they'll go home in the evening, they will starve themselves, all day because they don't have time. They work, a lot, then they
Hmm.
come home and they eat, a lot, and that's where
Hmm.
they gain weight, because then they go to bed, right? And they don't use that energy. So
Hmm.
what's interesting with what you're saying is, should we also in the real life jungle kind of think the same way and eat based on on the energy we need and not on our wants, right? When we're craving for an ice cream in the evening, right? Maybe we should say,
Hmm.
well, you know what, it might not be that good idea if I do it every day, kind of, so should we, be more in a survival mode also a little bit when we eat to stay healthy? What's your views on this?
I mean, to be honest, I can't say for sure. I'm not a nutritionist, but I definitely, um, I lived in the woods from when I was 18 to 19 for a year, after I'd studied survival for a while, and I wanted to test out my skills. And as part of that year, I'd also read a lot about fasting and how it's really good for you. And so I would fast, every 2 months. I'd fast for 4 days straight, and then maybe a couple times a week I'd just not eat for a day or two or something like that. And you get used to it. And in the beginning, it was really difficult, and then after that, it was almost refreshing to like take a day off of food and let your body kind of just process and relax. And um, so to this day, I definitely, I'll go long periods without eating, and then I'll just, get back into eating for a while and things like that. And I think that's a little bit reflective of the hunter gatherer lifestyle. Is that sometimes you kill a water buffalo and you're set for a while, and sometimes food's really light and you're just nibbling here and there. And so, I can't tell you the science behind whether or not that's healthy for you. I can tell you that it works for me and that I feel really good when I live that kind of lifestyle.
Great. And then can it happen, oh, I guess it can happen, but eating the wrong foods, something that's poisonous, you've seen probably the movie Into the Wild from, I
Hmm.
think it's Sean Penn, right, who produced it. And in there
Right.
he goes to Alaska, if I remember well, and he confuses the plant. So how big that risk is in the wild, and how do you, manage that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a lot of debate about whether or not John Krakauer's conclusion there was true, and I think a lot of plant specialists will argue with him. But nevertheless, there's definitely plants out there that if you eat them, they will kill you, and there's nothing the doctors can do about it. And there's there's times when I'm teaching plants, and let's say I'm teaching wild carrot, which is a great wild edible food. I need to absolutely positively make sure that everybody's paying attention, because there's very obvious signs that it's wild carrot. But if you're not paying attention and somebody's drifting off, and later on they start collecting wild carrot, but don't realize that all of a sudden they've actually started collecting poison hemlock or water hemlock, which looks, to the untrained eye, looks similar to wild carrot, and they start eating the root of that, which doesn't smell like carrot, and it's very obvious. But if they just stupidly and blindly started eating the root of that, it would kill them. And so there's a lot of mistakes you can make out there. And so I'm always lean on the side of caution, where there's people out there that say, oh, just try a little bit of the plant. And if it doesn't, mess with your system, then try a little bit more later. And I'm not a big fan of that system. I think learn from, the people in the environment that have been eating those for thousands of years. If not that, learn from books, but really put in your time ahead of time. Don't take chances. Um, Fortunately for me, when I was 17, starry-eyed about survival and everything else, and I just wanted to be, Daniel Boone, and going out into the woods and living off the land, my friend Nate and I were walking down the trail, and we saw this plant that had these little pea-shaped, these little green peas coming out of it, and I said, "That's got to be edible. It looks just like peas, Like that was my logic at the time. It looks like peas. It must be edible." And so I was like, "I'll eat one if you do." And popped it in our mouths, and I started chewing first, and I was like, "Oh, it tastes good." And within 10 seconds, I realized I made a huge mistake, and basically the chemical in it was calcium oxalate crystals, and it basically tasted like I just had eaten a million tiny razor blades, and my
Ooh.
mouth lit up on fire. And I looked over to my friend, and he spit his out because he hadn't even chewed it yet, and I ran for the car, and my mouth burned for like 5 or 6 hours. And so that was really one of my first experiences eating edible plants in the woods. And ever since then, I've known, like, don't try anything, don't even put anything in your mouth unless you absolutely know it's edible.
Yeah, that's a good advice there. And in the real life, we have a lot of good food, and sometimes, good soul food, which is good, but not always very good for the body on if you exaggerate it, right? Like too much sugar, too much, pizzas and stuff like this, and in the US and in the world, cancers, diabetes, and heart attacks is the top reasons of death, right?
Hmm.
And maybe adopting a more balanced diet, like you were talking about, and trying to balance things, not to just go for the hunters and gatherers diet, but just balance it might be a good thing. That's what I'm hearing. To
Yeah.
avoid those types of things. And
Yeah, I studied a bit of nutrition, and when I was getting my master's, working with humanitarian aid and what types of food they give people. And one of the things I realized is, it's definitely important to not eat certain foods, but a lot of the problems that people have with health are that they're not getting a certain amount of minerals and vitamins and everything else. And so I think having variety in your diet is more important than, following some sort of diet where you completely abstain from carbs, or you completely abstain from this or that. Like, I think, obviously not overdoing fats and sugars, but, having a variety in your diet is really key towards keeping your body systems working well.
great. And then what types of animals, do you trap and eat in the jungle? Give us a little taste of that.
So yeah, it really depends. I mean, people think of survival as like, oh, you're going to go out and be a survivalist and go, take down an elk and eat venison the entire time you're out there. And it's like the furthest thing from the truth, really. Um, you know, the rule that I try to impress upon people in survival is, one, you eat anything, like anything you can eat it. But two, you're trying to go for the things that are going to be the easiest to trap. And a lot of times that's going to be mice and rats and things that are in abundance. And so instead of trying to, take down a medium-sized animal, take down 10 rats and traps. And it's much more energy efficient to go after the easy kill. even if it's not exactly the dreamy romantic version of what you thought you were getting into. I'll eat anything from like grubs that I dig out of trees, which are just laden in fat. Um, and honestly, when you cook them, they taste like French fries. They're fantastic. To crickets, which also, I'm not lying, they actually do taste fantastic. And if I was like watching a football game, I'd sit around eating grasshoppers. They're fantastic. To, killing rats and mice um, but, I've eaten everything from monkeys to crocodiles and, whatever else in survival situations too.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So if I come and travel with you, for instance, I need to be ready to eat whatever is available. Basically, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, let's say the island survival class we host in the Caribbean, we're eating snails. It's almost like escargot. It tastes fantastic. We eat, we spear fish, so we're eating lionfish, which are fantastic, or triggerfish. I've gotten really close in that class to catching lobster, where we had our hands on them, but we just couldn't pull them in. So it's pretty good eating, and where you're at, and so yes, we also caught what do you call them, a mongoose in that class, and that's also great. If you haven't eaten in 4 days, a mongoose is unbelievably good
Yep.
tasting. So we do pretty well.
And being French, snails is going to be fine with me.
Oh, you're gonna love that.
Snails.
And you can eat as many as possible. There's millions of them out there.
That's great. So we are arriving at the end of the interview here. So few last questions. So if you would tell the audience here, maybe a recap of the essential versus non-essential things you would recommend people focus, in their lives to survive, to thrive. Any final words that you may have of wisdom, for people to build their lives, and make it through this, world, basically, what would it be?
Sure. I think my biggest, I can't necessarily tell you that I'm a huge success by any means, but I'm a success in the fact that my life has been incredibly adventurous. It's been a lot of fun, and I love it. I love every minute of it. And I think the thing that afforded me the opportunity to follow my passions and take chances is honestly, the fact that I lived for a year in the woods from 18 to 19. I lived off the land for that year. I spent $300 the entire year on little supplies that I needed here or there. And so that was one of the greatest years of my life. And I was able to live off of $300 for the entire year. And so anytime I'm faced with a choice or a chance, everybody else is faced with that what if question. What if, the shit hits the fan and I lose my job and I have nowhere else to go, and they settle for something that's not their greatest passion? Because I started at an early age with the foundation of saying, my answer to the what if question, what if I lose my job, or what if this doesn't work out? My answer was always, I can do the Pine Barrens and live off the land for $300 a year, and I'm going to have a great time. And so it afforded me that ability to take a risk. And so I think survival answers that question of what if it all falls apart? And you can put down that fear that things aren't going to work out, and therefore I have to settle. Put that away, and then it allows you to take a lot of chances and follow your passion. And so for me, survival is not just about learning to, connect with the land or learning to avoid the apocalypse or anything like that. It's a way of knowing in the back of your head that you can walk through your life being confident that you've answered that what if question. And so, to answer your question, for me, what's led to my success is, I've been able to kind of put aside that fear and follow my passions. And when you're excited about what you're doing and you're passionate about what you're doing, one, you have all the energy in the world to do it. So it doesn't feel like a job. For me, people ask what my job is, and I'm like, oh, well, I do survival stuff and I hang out with other people and do survival stuff, and somehow I make money doing that. And that's really what it feels like. It doesn't feel like something I'm working, in a stressful way towards. And so the second part of following your passions is that when you're lit up about what you're doing, it attracts other people to you that also want to be lit up, and they want to join you and they want to work with you on what you're doing because they see something in you that maybe they're missing in themselves. And so I think being passionate inspires others, and then they are magnetized toward you. And I think that could help in any situation, any business situation that you're in.
That's great, very inspiring. And to finish, how do we book a trip? Concretely, where do I go? Where do people that are listening to this podcast go to book a trip with you? And, how does it work?
Great. The best way to get in touch with me is on my website, which is wildsurvivalskills.com. On there, I list my courses, and I'm just getting over a 3.5-month run of courses, and then I'm off to Panama. And so my schedule will be coming out soon. But you can always book through there or contact me if you're interested in any different type of class.
Great. And then I would encourage everyone to go on YouTube. Your channel is Tom McElroy YouTube or Survival, right? What's the exact name of the channel?
I think Wild Survival. It might be Tom McElroy Wild Survival. I'm not positive, but if you type in survival into the search bar, it should pop up on the top couple.
Yep.
So
great.
Nice.
And I encourage to go check the videos. They're amazing, and it's going to inspire you a lot. So thanks a lot for this interview.